They say Alaska never truly sleeps. Even when the night sky burns with ribbons of green, the land beneath hides something ancient, something that watches. Hello everyone, welcome back Darknight family. Tonight, we're heading north, far beyond the warmth of city lights, into the frozen silence of Alaska, where legends breathe through the snow and every shadow might whisper your name. But before we dive into tonight's darkness, let me tell you about a man they found near the Yukon River last winter. He was barefoot. His eyes were wide open, frozen solid, staring toward the tree line. Carved into the ice beside him were 3 words. It followed me. They say his tracks led nowhere, just ended in the middle of the white, and those who went searching never spoke about what they saw next. Some say it was the Kushtaka, the shapeshifter, others, something older. So, what really hides beneath Alaska's endless snow? Let's find out together, because tonight we're uncovering the 7 most disturbing true Alaskan creepy legend horror stories. Turn off your lights, and welcome to Darknight. My name is Daniel Reed, and I used to work as a wildlife surveyor for the Alaskan Department of Fish and Game. I'd been stationed in Glacier Bay for most of 2018, one of those jobs where you're alone for weeks at a time, miles from the nearest road, just you, the snow, and the occasional passing wolf. People always ask me what the hardest part of Alaska is. The cold, the isolation, number. It's the silence. Because up there, silence doesn't mean peace. It means the land is listening. That winter, I was assigned to document animal migration routes along the frozen inlets of Glacier Bay. The area had always felt wrong to me. The Tlingit locals warned us not to wander too deep near the cliffs, where the bay narrows into a misty gorge they call Nax W. It translates loosely to the place where whistles walk. They said the Kushtaka live there, otter-like shapeshifters that lure lost men with the cries of loved ones. I used to laugh at those stories. Until one night, the whistling started. It was just past midnight, the wind howling so loud that my cabin walls groaned like a dying beast. I was cataloging motion-triggered camera data when I heard it. A high, eerie whistle that cut through the storm like it was right outside the window. It didn't sound like wind. It sounded like a person trying to imitate a bird. Sharp, deliberate, almost playful. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the snow. The beam caught nothing but drifting flakes and the half-buried prints of caribou. Still, the sound came again, closer this time, echoing from the edge of the trees. Then, through the white blur, I saw movement. A silhouette, crouched low near the tree line. For a moment, it looked like a man, until it tilted its head, and I caught the glint of wet fur. It stood, slowly, unnaturally tall, its limbs long and wrong, before vanishing behind the drift. When I ran toward it, the footprints I followed in the snow turned into webbed marks. That's when I stopped laughing at legends. The next morning, I woke up to the same whistle echoing faintly across the valley. This time, it wasn't random. It followed a rhythm. 3 short bursts, a pause, then 2 long ones, like a code. I tried to brush it off and packed my gear for the day. My plan was to retrieve one of the motion cameras I'd set near the cliffs 2 miles out. The hike was brutal. Snow waist-deep, wind cutting like glass. But halfway through the trail, I noticed something odd. Animal prints scattered near the frozen stream, yet they didn't belong to any species I knew. The tracks began as boots, human boots, then slowly shifted into webbed impressions with claw marks at the tips. I stopped and crouched down, heart hammering. The prints ended abruptly at the stream's edge, as though the person, or thing, had sunk into the ice itself. Then that sound again, closer, sharper. The whistling wasn't behind me anymore. It was above me. When I looked up, I saw something perched on the rock ledge, tall, crouched, dripping. Its face was smiling. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing in the snow. By the time I looked again, the thing was gone. The only evidence it had ever been there was the sound of the whistle fading into the distance. I made it to the cliff where my camera was stationed, but the device was missing. Ripped clean off the mount, wires hanging loose. Around the post were several deep gouges in the ice, like claws had scraped it. I decided to check the secondary camp, a small research tent left behind by a ranger team last month. But when I got there, the place was in ruins. The canvas was shredded, supplies scattered, and the snow was tinted with streaks of something dark, frozen, and red. Inside the collapsed tent was a torn notebook. Only one page remained legible, smeared with frost. The whistling never stops. If you hear your name, don't answer. I turned to leave, but I heard it again. Daniel. A whisper. Familiar. My sister's voice. She died 2 years ago. My flashlight trembled in my hand. That couldn't be real. It couldn't. But the voice came again, softer this time, almost pleading. Daniel, help me. I moved closer to the tree line, every rational thought screaming at me to stop. But grief does strange things to logic. My boots sank deep into the snow as I followed the sound into the trees. After about 100 feet, I saw her. Or at least, I thought I did. It was her shape, the same brown hair, the same jacket she used to wear on our hikes, standing with her back turned toward me. I took one step closer. She turned around. What I saw wasn't my sister. Its eyes were black and wet, its grin too wide, its skin rippling like water beneath fur. It opened its mouth and whistled, sharp and hollow, as its form began to distort, twisting between human and animal. That's when I ran. I sprinted through the forest, tripping over roots hidden under snow. The whistle followed me, not from one direction, but from everywhere. I didn't stop until I saw a faint orange glow ahead, an old campfire still burning weakly beneath a rocky overhang. 3 figures huddled around it, hunters, judging by their gear. Relief hit me hard. "Hey!" I shouted. They didn't respond. As I got closer, my relief turned to horror. They weren't moving. They were frozen solid, eyes wide, mouths agape, as if something had turned them to ice mid-scream. The fire beneath them still smoldered, the flames whispering around the frozen logs. On one of their coats, I found a patch, Alaska Ranger Service, missing since 1996. The snow began to fall heavier, covering the scene. Then the whistling began again, from behind the corpses. I fled back to my cabin, locked the door, and pushed the desk against it. My breath came in foggy bursts as I rummaged through my bag for my backup audio recorder. If that thing was real, I needed proof. Around 2 a.m., I turned it on and left it running by the window. Outside, the wind screamed, but beneath it, there it was. The same pattern of whistles. 3 short, 2 long. Then, faintly, Daniel. When I played the recording back, I nearly dropped it. The whisper wasn't just calling my name. It was repeating my breathing. Perfectly. Every inhale, every tremor. It was copying me. I threw the recorder into the fire. The flames hissed, sputtered, then went out completely. Silence returned. But I swear, in the dying embers, something moved. A dark reflection, smiling back at me from the window. By dawn, I decided to leave Glacier Bay. I packed my gear, mapped the route to the nearest ranger outpost, 12 miles southeast, across a frozen lake known as Mirror Lake. Locals said the Kushtaka used it as a doorway. I didn't care, I just wanted out. Halfway across, The wind stopped. The silence was absolute. Then I heard the faintest splash, far behind me. I turned, expecting nothing but white emptiness. Instead, I saw ripples forming in the ice beneath my boots. The surface shimmered like liquid, and just beneath it, a dark face stared up, smiling. I ran, boots cracking through the thin ice, each step echoing like gunfire. The whispers grew louder, dozens of them, mocking my every breath. When I looked back one last time, I saw hands, dozens of webbed hands, reaching up through the ice, grasping for me. I made it to the ranger outpost just before sunset. The place was empty. No people, no tracks, only a half-frozen generator humming faintly. I found a working radio and tried to signal for help. Nothing but static. Then, faintly, through the noise, a voice came. "Daniel, come back." It was my voice. The generator sputtered, lights flickered, and from the corner of the room came that familiar whistle. I spun around, nothing there. Just frost creeping along the walls, forming shapes, outlines of faces. I backed toward the door, flashlight trembling, and that's when I saw it outside, standing just beyond the glass. It wasn't one anymore. There were three. I bolted out the back door and into the woods. My lungs burned as I tore through branches and snowdrifts. Behind me, the whistles grew louder, overlapping, chasing me from every direction. My flashlight died. The moonlight glimmered weakly through the trees as I stumbled down a steep slope and fell hard into the snow. For a moment, I just lay there, breathless, listening. Silence. Then a whisper, inches from my ear. "Why did you leave her, Daniel?" Hands grabbed my ankles, cold and slick. I kicked and screamed, clawing at the ground as the snow beneath me softened like slush. A face emerged beside mine, my sister's face, smiling, eyes black and bottomless. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Juneau. They said I was found unconscious near the shoreline, my skin frostbitten, my gear destroyed. No footprints around me, just mine, leading from nowhere. The authorities found my cabin too. Everything was intact, except one thing, my audio recorder. The same one I'd thrown into the fire. It was lying on the table, still warm. When they played it back, they told me it wasn't my voice they heard. It was a woman whispering, over and over, through static and wind. "Daniel's gone home. Daniel's gone home." I've never gone back to Glacier Bay, but sometimes, when I drive at night, I catch my reflection in the glass, and it whistles back at me. My name is Ava Jensen, and for 7 years I worked as a nurse in the small coastal town of Nome, Alaska. Population barely 3,000, surrounded by tundra, ice, and silence that could drive you insane if you listened too long. Back then, Nome had a problem. People were disappearing. Dozens, actually. Men, women, hunters, hikers, all gone without a trace between 1990 and 2005. Locals called it the Nome Missing. The FBI blamed alcohol, exposure, and bad weather. But the old Inuit families whispered a different name, Kalupalik, the children of the Midnight Sea. They said these weren't humans, but pale, childlike spirits that lived under the ice, waiting for those who walked alone after dark. They would mimic the cries of children to lure people closer, then drag them beneath. I used to think it was folklore meant to scare outsiders, until the night I heard a child crying outside my cabin. It was past midnight, and the snowstorm was brutal, but the sound was unmistakable, a young girl sobbing carried on the wind. I put on my parka and stepped out into the cold. The voice came again. "Please, help me." And then I saw the small footprints, barefoot, leading toward the frozen beach. The footprints stopped near the shoreline, right where the frozen sea began. The snow had been disturbed, like something had been dragged, or had crawled, into the blackness beneath the ice. "Hello?" I called out, voice trembling. The wind had stopped completely. That's when I heard it again, the same cry, but this time from under the ice. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the frozen surface. Beneath the layer of translucent blue, I saw a flicker of movement. A small hand pressing up from the other side, fingers pale and blue, tapping weakly. My instincts screamed to help. I grabbed the ice pick from my belt and started chipping. But the second I struck, a sound erupted. Not a cry this time, but a chorus of voices. Dozens of children screaming all at once. I stumbled back, heart pounding, as cracks spidered across the ice. A pale face surfaced beneath it, eyes open, mouth wide. But it wasn't drowning. It was smiling. The ice shattered. Something moved beneath. I ran. I made it back to my cabin shaking uncontrollably. I locked the door, lit a lantern, and sat there until dawn, trying to convince myself it was just exhaustion, hallucinations from too many night shifts. But the next morning, a local ranger named Eli came knocking. They'd found a missing poster on the bulletin board at the clinic. A little girl named Sophie, missing for 3 days. The picture showed the same childlike figure I'd seen in the snow, the same braids, the same round face. When I told Eli what I'd seen near the beach, he went pale. "You shouldn't go near the shore after midnight," he said. "Not in Nome. Not alone." He told me that back in the 80s, entire families vanished near the coast. Locals said they'd heard crying children right before the disappearances. Some claimed to have seen small hands reach out from the frozen surf. Eli looked down at the floor and muttered, "They take the lonely ones." That night, I couldn't sleep. And around 12:03 a.m., the crying started again. The crying grew louder, closer, until I could swear it was just outside my window. I stood up slowly, my heart racing. Then came 3 soft knocks on the glass. I froze. Through the frost, a small face appeared. The girl from the poster. Her lips were blue, her eyes wide, and she was mouthing something I couldn't hear. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it at her face, and that's when I saw it. Her pupils weren't black. They were empty, like holes punched through her skull, and her mouth wasn't moving anymore. It was opening wider. The frost around the window started to melt as if from heat, but the air grew colder. I stepped back, hands shaking, as she whispered, "Come play with us." Then her face dissolved into mist, and the sound of dozens of small footsteps circled the cabin. I didn't sleep that night. I just waited for daylight and prayed that the sun would rise. The next morning, I visited the clinic to clear my head. Eli was there, speaking quietly with an older Inuit woman named Mara, who owned a small museum of local artifacts. When I told her what I'd seen, she nodded slowly. "You've heard the Kalupalik," she said. "They wear the faces of drowned children. They call to those who feel alone." Then she handed me a small cassette tape, its label faded. Coast Patrol, 1989. "Listen before you sleep," she said. That night, I played it on my old recorder. The tape began with static, then the sound of wind and waves. A man's voice came through. "Coastline clear, heading west." Then, faintly, laughter. Dozens of children laughing, echoing through the wind. The man screamed, and the tape cut. Before I could eject it, my recorder stopped. The tape reversed itself, on its own. And from the speaker, in a soft, child's voice, came a whisper. "Ava, come outside." I don't remember opening the door. One moment I was inside, the next, I was walking barefoot through the snow, following the sound of laughter toward the beach. The ocean had frozen in jagged shards of black ice stretching for miles. The air was deathly still. And then, I saw them. Children, at least a dozen, standing silently on the ice, their heads tilted, skin pale and glistening as if carved from glass. Their eyes reflected no light. In the center stood Sophie, smiling. She raised a hand and pointed toward the dark water beneath the ice. When I looked down, I saw dozens more faces staring up. Adults, kids, people I recognized from the missing posters, all reaching upward from beneath the frozen surface. The laughter stopped, the ice cracked, and everything fell silent again. When I woke up, I was in my bed, clothes soaked, skin numb. I didn't remember coming back. My boots were missing, and my hair smelled of salt water. On the floor near my bed lay wet footprints, small, barefoot, leading to my window. Outside, the snowstorm raged again. I tried to call Eli, but the phone line was dead. I sat there shaking until I heard something faint beneath the wind. The sound of my own voice, whispering, "Ava, it's beautiful down here." I screamed and threw the phone, but then I saw it. The cassette tape had melted into a puddle of black water on my nightstand. When I wiped it away, there were small fingerprints beneath it, pressed into the wood. That's when I knew I wasn't dreaming. The next day, Eli and 2 others joined me to investigate the shore. We found drag marks in the snow and clothing frozen into the ice. A red scarf, a mitten, a small shoe. When Eli reached down to examine it, the ice broke beneath him. We barely managed to pull him out, but when we did, his hand was covered in bite marks, small, circular, like from a child's teeth. That night, Eli wouldn't speak. He just sat by the fire, staring at his hand, whispering, "They're not children. They wear their skins." By morning, he was gone. His boots were still by the door. Only a trail of small footprints led back toward the beach. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to end it. That night, I went back to the beach with a flare gun and a rope tied to my waist. The moon reflected silver across the frozen sea. When I called out, the air rippled. Sophie appeared again, only this time she was closer, her face cracking like ice as she smiled. "You shouldn't have followed us," she said. Her voice layered, echoing with dozens behind it. The ice opened beneath her, revealing black water filled with faces, all whispering my name. I fired the flare. The red light illuminated hundreds of them, swarming beneath the ice, pale hands reaching upward. Then, one grabbed my ankle. They found me 2 days later, washed ashore miles down the coast. No sign of Eli, no footprints, just shards of ice embedded in my arms and a voice recorder in my coat pocket. The last thing on the tape wasn't the wind or waves. It was the sound of children laughing. Then, a single voice, mine, whispering, "I'm not cold anymore." I left Nome after that winter, but every year when the sea freezes, I still hear them, faint, echoing through the air at midnight. The locals say if you stand by the beach long enough, you can see small figures playing beneath the ice. They look like children, until they start waving for you to come closer. My name is Mark Hanlon, and I grew up hearing stories about the abandoned village of Portlock, Alaska. It's a place that doesn't appear on most modern maps anymore, a remote settlement on the southern edge of the Kenai Peninsula that was once home to a small fishing community. But in 1949, everyone left. Overnight. They didn't move. They fled. My grandfather was one of the last men to see Portlock alive. He was a fisherman, part of a crew that worked the inlet back in the 40s. When I was a kid, he used to tell me about the nights when something walked out of the woods, how they'd find huge footprints along the shoreline that didn't match any animal they knew. He said they used to call it Nantinak, half spirit, half beast, the hairy man of the mountain. But there was something else he never told me until his final year alive, something he swore was worse than the Noatak itself. He told me about the pale woman, the one who smiled through the fog. When I got older and started working in documentary film, I decided to make a short series on Alaskan ghost towns. I wanted to prove the legends wrong, to show the world that Portlock was just a story gone wild. So in 2019, I took a small team of 3, my cameraman Eric, sound tech Jenna, and myself, and we set off by boat from Homer Harbor toward the overgrown ruins of Portlock. From the start, it felt like we were intruding. The sea was unnaturally still. Even the gulls didn't follow us out that day. When the outline of the old cannery appeared through the mist, I felt something tighten in my chest. The roofs were collapsed, the docks half swallowed by seaweed and rot. We dropped anchor, loaded our gear, and stepped onto the dock. The moment my boots hit the wood, a cold whisper drifted from the tree line. A woman's voice, faint and lilting. Jenna turned to me and asked, "Did you hear that?" I nodded. Eric said nothing, but he started filming immediately. That night, as we set up camp beside the ruins of the old schoolhouse, I replayed the audio from our first few minutes ashore. The voice was there, clearer now. A woman humming a song. Except, it wasn't any language I knew. And underneath her humming was the sound of something breathing, slow and wet, right next to the mic. That first night in Portlock, none of us slept much. Jenna kept saying she heard movement outside the tents, the crunch of wet gravel, like footsteps pacing back and forth just beyond the firelight. Eric thought it was sea otters scavenging near the beach, but when he checked, the sound stopped completely. The air had that heavy, frozen feel, where every breath came out thick and white. At around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of our wind chime recorder, a metal rig we used to capture ambient sound, gently ringing from the schoolhouse ruins. Except we hadn't put any chimes there. I grabbed my headlamp and camera, stepping into the fog. The ruins looked even older at night, the black frames of windows staring out like empty eyes. The chime sound came again, this time followed by something that made my stomach drop. A woman's laugh, soft, musical, but wrong. When I turned the light toward the sound, I saw her, standing halfway down the hallway, her skin as white as snow, hair clinging wet to her face. She didn't move or speak, just stared. Then, as my light flickered, her head tilted sideways, a jerky, unnatural motion, and she smiled. Not a warm smile, the kind that stretches too wide. By the time I blinked, she was gone. Sunrise. I convinced myself it had been a trick of the light. Fog, exhaustion, paranoia. The mind plays games when you're surrounded by ruin. We started filming again, capturing B-roll of the cannery and nearby cliffs. But when Eric began shooting near one of the collapsed cabins, he called us over. The wooden walls were carved with symbols, hundreds of them, overlapping like something desperate had scratched at the surface for years. They weren't words, just jagged spirals, hands, and long streaks like claws. Jenna noticed that several carvings were centered around a woman's face, crude but clear. A pale oval with hollow eyes and a thin, stretched mouth. That's when the wind shifted. It came from inland, bringing with it the faint sound of humming again. The same song from our audio. We packed up and decided to move our camp closer to the beach. Open ground, easier to see what's coming. But that night, when we replayed the footage from Eric's camera, something wasn't right. At the end of the clip, just before it cut, a frame flashed for less than a second. A woman's face, inches from the lens, eyes black and mouth open in a silent scream. Eric swore he hadn't seen it while filming. The following morning, Eric was gone. His sleeping bag was still zipped, his boots missing, camera left behind. There were footprints leading away from camp, deep ones in the sand, heading straight into the woods. Except halfway through the trail, they vanished. No wind could have erased them that cleanly. We searched for hours, no trace, no sound, only the echo of our own breathing. By the time the light began to fade, Jenna and I returned to camp. That's when we found his recorder. It was sitting on a log, switched on, still running. The last few minutes were quiet. Wind, distant gulls, the creak of trees. Then, faintly, Eric's voice whispered, "Who's out there?" A pause. Then a woman's whisper replied, "You came back." And the tape ended. By the third day, the isolation began to gnaw at us. Jenna barely spoke. I caught her standing by the waterline, whispering into the fog like she was answering someone. When I called her name, she turned sharply and said, "She wants you to leave." That evening, I explored the cannery again, desperate to find something, anything, that could explain the stories. Inside the foreman's office, I found a journal, half-rotted and frozen to the floor. The first pages were mundane, fishing records, dates, storms. But near the end, the handwriting turned frantic. They say the woman watches from the cliffs. First came the humming, then the missing, "Don't look at her when she smiles. She wears their faces." The last line was written 3 times. "She wears their faces." That night, I heard Eric's voice outside the tent, calling my name. But when I stepped out, it wasn't him. I followed the voice down to the shoreline. Fog hung so thick, it swallowed my light. When I reached the edge of the water, something floated there, a shape barely visible beneath the ice. It looked like a body, male. Face turned upward. When I leaned closer, the face slowly rose to the surface, eyes open, staring, and my blood froze. It was Eric, but his mouth, it wasn't his. The jawline was stretched, reshaped, like someone had pressed a second face over his. Suddenly, his eyes blinked, and the body smiled. I stumbled back, screaming, but when I looked again, the water was empty. When I returned to camp, Jenna was gone. Only her camera remained, still recording. On the footage, she sat near the fire, humming softly, the same tune from before. Then she turned toward the lens, eyes glassy, and whispered, "She's here." The next moment, a pale hand rested on her shoulder, then static. That night, I hid inside the schoolhouse. The wind screamed through the broken windows, and somewhere outside, something was laughing. I realized then, the pale woman wasn't a ghost. She was a remnant, something ancient that fed on grief, wearing the faces of those who saw her. And she had new faces now. Packed my bag and ran. Through the forest, through the fog, until my lungs burned. I kept the camera rolling the whole time. When I reached the shore, I found our boat, half sunken, rope severed. Something moved in the water, circling beneath the surface like a shadow. Then a voice came from behind me, soft, gentle. "Don't go." I turned, and saw my own face staring back. The camera dropped as the ice cracked underfoot, and for a moment before it fell, I saw her, the pale woman, half submerged, smiling. Then everything went black. 3 months later, a Coast Guard team recovered our equipment near Portlock Bay. The footage was classified, though a few clips leaked online, distorted, hard to verify. In one still frame, the pale woman's face can be seen reflected in the water, behind me. Another shows Jenna walking into the fog, hand in hand with someone who looks exactly like me. The official report lists Eric and Jenna as missing, presumed dead. As for me, I was found unconscious on a fishing vessel, half frozen, camera clutched in my hand. The footage inside showed one final scene, a mirror. and behind my reflection. She smiled. Sometimes, I still hear her humming when I close my eyes. A lullaby with no words, echoing from somewhere cold and endless. They say Portlock remains abandoned, but fishermen swear they still see lights moving among the ruins, and hear a woman's voice singing from the cliffs. Maybe she's still looking for faces to wear, or maybe she's still wearing ours. Whatever she is, she's patient, and she remembers anyone who listens to her song. If you ever visit the southern coast of Alaska and hear someone humming through the fog, don't answer. She doesn't like to be ignored. My name is Ryan Cole, and I spent 2 winters stationed north of the Arctic Circle, studying permafrost erosion near the Noatak River. I wasn't a local. I was a geologist from Anchorage, logical, skeptical, the kind of man who laughed at ghost stories. But what happened during my final survey changed that forever. It started in late December of 2020, when our research team, 5 of us in total, was assigned to measure subglacial shifts caused by melting layers beneath the tundra. We set up camp about 30 miles from the nearest village, surrounded by nothing but white and silence. On our 3rd week, our ground-penetrating radar started picking up anomalies beneath the ice. Large, irregular voids that didn't match any known formation. The locals told us to leave it alone. They said we'd found the hollow graves. At first, we ignored them. But one night, our generator failed, and we found tracks around our tents, barefoot human prints pressed deep into the snow. Impossible, given the temperature. Then we heard it, a slow, rhythmic knocking from below the ice, like someone, or something, was trapped underneath. We thought it was the glacier shifting, until it started answering us. The knocking didn't stop. Every night, around the same time, a dull, distant rhythm echoed beneath our camp. 3 knocks, pause, then 2. We tried to locate the source using the radar. The signal came from about 60 feet below the surface, inside one of the voids. At first, we assumed it was just ice expansion. But ice doesn't move like that. It doesn't sound organized. By the 5th night, curiosity outweighed fear. We set up a borehole and lowered a thermal probe. The live feed flickered as it descended, static, cold interference, until it hit something solid. Not ice, flesh. The thermal signature showed faint heat, pulsing, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Then the monitor glitched, and a human eye filled the screen for less than a second. When it cut out, the knocking started again, faster this time, right below our feet. That's when we decided to dig. The first layer was solid permafrost, tough, brittle, and unyielding. But about 6 feet down, the ice turned soft and dark. It smelled wrong, like rot trapped for centuries. We used thermal cutters to melt through, revealing a narrow tunnel descending into the glacier. We took turns lowering cameras into the gap. The feed showed something buried deep, dozens of shapes, humanoid, frozen mid-motion, all facing upward. Their faces were open, not screaming, not peaceful, expectant, as though they'd been waiting. Then one of them moved. The camera's perspective jolted as if someone grabbed the cord. A blurred hand, grayish and slick, reached into view. We pulled the line immediately, but it came back snapped in half. That night, the knocking became louder, directly beneath my tent. And when I leaned close to the floor, I could hear faint breathing from under the ice. We tried to report it to base. The radio was dead, static, no response. The aurora overhead shimmered violently that night, turning the snow pale green. Something about the silence made me nauseous. At dawn, our medic, Dr. Vega, went missing. We found her parka halfway to the ridge, covered in bloody handprints, but not hers. They were small, child-sized. We searched until sundown. Nothing. Only more prints circling the drill site, disappearing into the glacier itself. I swear, in the distance, I saw her, half buried in ice, eyes open, lips moving soundlessly. When I ran toward her, the figure vanished. All that remained was the wind. That night, I woke to the sound of someone whispering my name. I turned on my lamp. Frost had formed inside my tent, and in that frost, I saw finger streaks dragged from the outside in. By morning, we were down to 3. I insisted we leave, but the lead scientist, Dr. Harland, refused. He said this was an unprecedented biological discovery. So we drilled deeper. At 40 feet, the tunnel opened into a cavern of blue ice, a hollow world beneath the tundra. It was massive, cathedral-like, walls lined with frozen bodies in transparent ice. Some were ancient, wearing animal furs. Others looked recent, modern clothing, even orange safety vests like ours. But the strangest part? Each corpse had its mouth wide open, ice crystallized mid-breath. Then, from the center of the cavern, came a faint voice. A woman's voice, whispering a lullaby. Harland called out into the dark, his voice echoing. The singing stopped. Then came the knock. We followed the sound toward a frozen mound near the cavern's heart. Inside it, through clear ice, was the body of a woman, perfectly preserved. Her skin was pale, unbroken, and her eyes were open. It looked like she was smiling. Harland ordered us to thaw the specimen for analysis. We argued, but he started the heater anyway. The ice began to melt, and that's when her eyes moved. A crack shot through the ice, then another. Her mouth opened slowly, and a deep, hollow breath filled the cavern. The generator flickered. Lights dimmed. And from every wall around us, the frozen corpses began to twitch. We ran for the rope line. Harland didn't make it. The last thing I saw before climbing out was his flashlight falling, and a pale hand dragging him into the dark. When I reached the surface, the storm had started. Visibility 0. Wind screaming like something alive. I stumbled through the snow, disoriented, until I reached camp, or what was left of it. The tents were shredded, our gear scattered. One of the motion sensors was still blinking. I replayed the last feed. It showed a shape crawling out of the borehole, woman-shaped, but wrong. Her limbs bent backward, her skin like carved ice, eyes glowing white. She stood for a moment, scanning the camp, then turned toward the camera. She smiled. I dropped the tablet and ran. But everywhere I looked, faces were forming in the snow, my team, whispering, reaching. And the woman's voice followed me through the wind. "Don't bury us again." By morning, the storm broke. I made my way toward the Noatak River, hoping to reach the emergency beacon by the ridge. But the river was gone, replaced by a canyon of collapsed ice stretching for miles. In the cracks, I saw them. Hundreds of faces, not carved, not frozen, but real, preserved in the ice. Eyes open, mouths moving beneath the surface, as though they were still trying to breathe. As I stumbled past, one of the faces pressed against the ice. It was Harland. He mouthed something over and over. We dug too deep. My satellite recorder finally connected near the ridge. I sent the distress signal, attached the audio logs, and waited. But as the wind calmed, the knocking returned. Faint, rhythmic, beneath my feet again. 3 knocks. Pause. 2. I pressed my recorder against the ground. A whisper came through. "You left us behind." The ground cracked open. I dropped the recorder and ran until the snow turned to open ice. When I looked back, the entire glacier was collapsing inward, swallowing everything. I don't remember how long I wandered before the rescue chopper found me. They said I was delirious, frostbitten, talking about voices in the ice. They recovered none of my team, and when the thaw came that spring, the glacier near Noatak shifted back, sealing every trace of the cavern. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I play back the final transmission the Coast Guard saved from my recorder. It's mostly static, but under the noise you can still hear it, that faint, rhythmic knocking. 3. Pause. 2. I used to think it was just the glacier. Now I'm not so sure the ice ever sleeps. My name is Aaron Vale, and I was a search and rescue pilot stationed near Denali National Park for 12 years. Flying over Alaska's frozen wilderness changes a person. You start hearing the silence, the way it hums against your skull. You start believing the old legends the locals tell you. But nothing prepared me for the voice that answered me back. It happened in February of 2017. We were called out to locate a missing mountaineer named Lucas Hayes, a solo climber who'd last radioed from the western ridge of Denali. His last transmission was strange. "There's someone up here with me." Sounds just like me. When the storm cleared, we flew out in a chopper. Me, my co-pilot Derek, and rescue tech Melissa. The snowfield below looked untouched, except for a single set of footprints heading toward a narrow crevasse. We set down about a quarter-mile away and hiked in. The air was unnaturally still. No wind, no sound, but our own crunching steps. Then, out of nowhere, my own voice came from the ridge ahead. "Derek, Melissa, over here." I froze. Derek looked at me, pale. "That wasn't you, right?" I shook my head. The echo came again, identical tone, identical cadence. But it wasn't bouncing back. It was approaching. We should have left then. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, but professionalism, or pride, kept us going. We followed the footprints into the fog, and the trail split. 2 sets now, as if Lucas had been walking beside a perfect copy of himself. Melissa radioed the base. Before she could finish, a garbled voice came through the static. "Turn back. It wants your sound." The line went dead. We reached the crevasse's edge and saw a rope anchored into the ice. A body was hanging about 20 feet down, still, motionless. Derek rappelled first, calling out, "Lucas? You hear me?" Then the voice came again. But this time it was Derek's, from behind me. "Aaron, get down here!" Except Derek was still below me. I turned, flashlight sweeping the whiteout haze, and there it was. A man standing on the ridge, wearing Derek's jacket. Same height, same posture. It tilted its head slightly and grinned. The skin around its mouth split too far. Then it mimicked me. Perfectly. "Help me. Please." I stumbled back, my breath freezing in my mask. From the crevasse, Derek screamed. When I reached the edge, Derek was gone. His rope had been cut clean through, the end frozen and smooth. Melissa shouted my name, but it came from the opposite side, and when I turned, she was standing behind me. Her lips weren't moving. Another Melissa was emerging from the fog, identical parka, same face, except her eyes were pitch black. "Don't listen to it," the real Melissa whispered beside me. "It only echoes what it kills." We started running back toward the helicopter. The snow beneath us began to move, rippling like breathing skin. Voices surrounded us now, dozens of them, all ours, all perfect copies. Some begged, some screamed. And then I saw Derek crawling from the fog, face white as frost. He looked at me and said softly, "Aaron, I found myself, and I was already dead." Then his head tilted back, and he collapsed, his face vanishing into the snow like it had never existed. We reached the helicopter, barely able to see through the storm. Melissa jumped into the cockpit first, trying to start the engine, but the controls were frozen solid. Then a voice whispered right in my ear, "Aaron!" I spun around. There I was, standing outside the chopper, staring back at myself through the snow. My double's parka was torn, his face pale, lips cracked open like frostbitten bark. He stepped closer, every movement wrong, jerky, delayed. He whispered again, "Come back down. You left us in the ice." I raised my flare gun and fired. The red glow lit up his face, and for 1 second, I saw hundreds of others behind him, stretching into the storm, each one wearing my face. We managed to lift off after nearly 20 minutes of trying. As we rose above the ridge, I looked down through the window and saw the entire snowfield below shifting, as if the mountain itself was alive, swallowing its secrets again. No bodies, no gear, not even footprints. When we returned to base, the commander said search teams had already found Lucas's remains 2 days earlier, buried deep in the snow miles away. That was impossible. I played back the flight recorder. There were 3 voices, mine, Melissa's, and a third that sounded like me, whispering beneath the static, "I told you not to look back." Melissa quit a week later. She doesn't talk about Denali anymore. But every winter, when the wind howls just right outside my cabin, I hear it again. My own voice, whispering from the snow. 3 nights after we returned to base, the storm finally cleared. But something wasn't right. The team's communications officer, Riley, was monitoring open channels when he picked up a faint SOS, an old analog distress code used in the 1970s. The signal's source? The same ridge we'd just escaped from. Riley turned pale when he played it back. The voice on the transmission was mine. "Rescue team down." Repeat, "We're trapped inside the ice." I didn't remember ever saying those words. The timestamp on the transmission showed February 22nd, the exact day we'd been there. Melissa begged the commander to ignore it. "That place copies sound," she said. "It's not human." But protocol demanded investigation. By morning, 2 new pilots were assigned to return, and I was ordered to guide them. As we approached Denali again, the mountain was dead silent. No birds, no wind, just a hollow echo of rotor blades bouncing off the glacier walls. Then, through the static, my voice whispered again on the radio. "You shouldn't have come back." We landed half a mile from the last GPS ping. The 2 new pilots, Sam and Quinn, began unloading equipment. I tried to warn them not to separate, but Sam laughed. "You're just spooked, man." Minutes later, he vanished into the fog. Quinn and I followed his trail until we reached a cliffside that overlooked a massive ice fissure. At the bottom, a figure was waving up at us, Sam. But something was off. His movements were delayed, slightly out of sync, as though his body was copying gestures seconds after they happened. Then he looked up, and I saw it. His mouth open unnaturally wide, and his eyes reflecting light from below, like an animal's. Quinn started climbing down to help, but I pulled him back. The figure below stopped waving and tilted its head backward until the neck snapped audibly. Then it spoke in Quinn's voice. "Aaron, help me." "He's still down here." Before I could stop him, Quinn descended into the fissure. The rope went taut, then slack. Seconds later, his voice came from above me. "Aaron, help me up." I looked up, and there was Quinn, standing on the ridge, even though he'd been below seconds ago. His clothes were wet, and his eyes had that same mirrored reflection. I raised my flare. "Who are you?" I shouted. He smiled, and dozens of voices echoed from inside the glacier, all overlapping, all mimicking me. "We are what you left behind." The fissure cracked open, the ice splitting in a deafening roar. Hands, human, white, and frostbitten, began crawling out from the gap, reaching for the surface. Some wore rescue uniforms. Some looked exactly like me. I ran. I don't know how far. The blizzard swallowed everything: light, sound, direction. Behind me, I heard my own voice calling from every direction. "Aaron, come back! You forgot us!" By the time I reached the helicopter, Quinn, or whatever wore his face, was already inside. He smiled through the window as I approached, blood frozen on his cheek. Then the chopper's rotors began to spin. No one was touching the controls. The blades roared to life, lifting into the air on their own, and as it rose, I saw through the cockpit glass. Hundreds of faces pressed against the interior, all whispering the same thing: "We remember you." Then it crashed, directly into the mountainside. The explosion was swallowed by snow. I didn't even flinch. I never went back to Denali after that. The official report blamed equipment failure and low visibility. But I know better. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind shifts through the pines outside my cabin, I hear the radio crackle. "Aaron, do you copy?" Once I answered. I said, "Who is this?" There was silence. Then a voice, mine, broken and faint, replied, "You never left." The next morning, I found fresh footprints in the snow leading away from my cabin. Barefoot, human. They ended at the tree line, and when I looked up, a figure stood there, wearing my jacket, smiling back at me. My name is Eli Turner, and I've fished the waters off Kodiak Island for almost 20 years. Nothing scares you out here after a while. Not the storms, not the silence, not even the way the ocean looks black when the moon disappears. But there was one night, 5 years ago, that changed me. Because that night, the sea started talking back. It began like any other run. I was out with 2 deckhands, Caleb and Owen, trawling for halibut just past Old Harbor. The weather was calm, glassy. No radio interference, no sign of fog. Then, at around 2 a.m., the wind dropped. Everything went still. Even the water stopped moving. And then, out of nowhere, a thick white fog rose from the surface, swallowing the stars. I remember Caleb muttering, "That's not natural." He was right, because inside that fog, we could hear voices, low, dragging, like a dozen men mumbling underwater. Owen leaned over the railing and called out, "Hey! Anyone out there?" A voice answered. Mine. "Yeah, help me pull the net." But I hadn't spoken. Caleb froze. "Eli, that was you," he whispered. I didn't answer. The voice had been perfect. Same tone, same hesitation. Then another one joined in. This time it sounded like Owen, but slower, dragged out, like someone learning how to speak. "We're still working, Captain." A scraping sound came from beneath the hull, metal against metal. Owen leaned over the side again, flashlight scanning the dark water, but all we saw was fog. Then something rose up beside the boat. A face. Gray, bloated, waterlogged, eyes completely black. It opened its mouth, seawater spilling out, and croaked, "Pull the nets." Owen screamed and stumbled back. I cut the engine. The sea was still again, but the fog around us moved like it was alive, twisting, curling, and whispering our names. And then the nets started to move, by themselves. I shouted for Caleb to grab the winch, but before he could, the net ropes tightened violently, jerking the boat sideways. Something heavy was pulling from below. We struggled to reel them in. The line snapped, slicing across Caleb's shoulder. He cried out, blood soaking his sleeve. Then, through the fog, shadowy figures began to rise from the water, one after another, men in soaked fishing coats, eyes black as oil, faces pale as bone. They weren't swimming, they were standing. One of them still had half a life jacket clinging to his arm. the same kind we used 20 years ago. He lifted his head and said in a voice full of gurgling seawater, "You left us in the storm, Eli." Caleb looked at me, terrified. "How do they know your name?" I didn't answer, because I already knew. Back in 2005, I had captained a small crew, the Mariner's Ghost. We'd gone missing during a storm off the same coast. Only I survived. The sea had brought the others back. Owen panicked and fired a flare gun into the mist. The red light cut through the fog and illuminated dozens more figures in the water, circling the boat. Their movements were slow, synchronized, as if pulled by the same current. Caleb started the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. The figures' faces pressed closer against the hull. The wood creaked under their weight. Then we heard it again. The same whispering, but now from inside the boat. Owen turned, and there, dripping seawater, stood one of them in the cabin doorway. It smiled, mouth filled with black liquid, and said, "We missed you, Captain." The lights flickered. Owen swung a wrench, but it passed right through the figure, scattering water across the floor. He looked at me, eyes wide, and then something pulled him backward, straight through the open hatch, into the sea. He didn't scream. He just vanished. We were down to 2. The fog pressed in tighter, so thick we could barely see the deck. Then came the sound, faint at first, of a melody. A slow, wordless song that rose and fell like the tide. Caleb covered his ears, shouting, "Make it stop!" But I couldn't move. The sound pulled at me like a tide inside my skull. I stepped to the railing. The fog parted, and there they were. Rows of drowned fishermen standing on the water, singing without moving their mouths. Their eyes glistened like wet coal. Caleb grabbed my arm. "Eli, don't listen." But I was already hearing words inside the melody. They weren't random. They were names. Mine, Caleb's, Owen's, and then my old crew. The singing stopped. Caleb looked at me, tears freezing on his face. "Eli, they're calling you." "Why?" Before I could answer, a dripping hand reached up from between the deck planks and grabbed his boot. He screamed, trying to pull free. I grabbed him under the arms, but the hand's grip was inhumanly strong. More hands followed, pale, black-nailed, reaching through the cracks. Caleb's eyes met mine. "Don't let them!" The boards split open and dragged him down, water flooding the deck in seconds. Then the floor sealed again, smooth, dry, like he'd never existed. I stumbled back, hyperventilating. The fog was inside the cabin now, crawling across the walls. And then I heard Caleb's voice whisper from the radio, "You left me too, Captain." I locked myself inside the cabin. Outside, the whispering had turned into laughter. Soft, broken, wrong. The window glass fogged from the inside, and on it, I saw my reflection. Only it wasn't me. Its eyes were black. I wiped the window. The reflection smiled even though I hadn't moved. Then, faintly, it mouthed the words, "We remember what you did." My chest tightened. During that 2005 storm, the one only I survived, I had cut the safety lines to keep the ship from capsizing. It saved me, but it doomed the rest. And now the sea had come to collect what I owed. The radio crackled again, static mixed with whispers. Then 3 knocks echoed on the cabin door. Slow, even, wet. I raised the flare gun and shouted, "Stay back!" A familiar voice replied, "My own. Let us in, Captain." The sea's calm now. The door handle turned. I fired through it. Silence. Then, faintly, from every direction, "That won't save you this time." The door burst open. The fog rushed in like a wave, and they came with it. Dozens of them, their eyes hollow voids, mouths open in silent song. Their hands reached through the smoke, cold as the grave, and one of them, the one at the front, wore my face. I backed into the corner as my double stepped forward. He looked exactly like me, but older, bloated, dripping seawater. He smiled and whispered, "You belong to the tide." The room filled with freezing water in seconds. I tried to climb onto the table, but hands grabbed my legs and pulled me under. Darkness swallowed everything. When I opened my eyes, I was underwater, staring up through the rippling surface. The boat was gone. The fog, gone. Only endless, cold silence. Then I saw them. My old crew floating around me, faces peaceful now. One reached out, touching my shoulder. I felt warmth, forgiveness. And then everything went dark again. They found my boat 3 weeks later, drifting near Glacier Bay. No crew, no damage, no footprints. The Coast Guard said it looked like the men just stepped off, but locals say, on foggy nights, you can still see the mariner's ghost drifting offshore. Its deck lights flicker like fireflies, and sometimes you can hear men singing out on the tide. I've heard it myself from shore. And when the wind carries it right, I swear one of those voices sounds like mine, whispering to the waves, "We're still working, Captain." I've lived in Anchorage my whole life, but I never knew what lay beneath the city until the thaw of 2019. That spring, the ground shifted. The permafrost cracked open behind our research station near Portage Glacier, revealing a massive sinkhole that went down. God knows how far. I was part of a small geological survey team, myself, Dr. Larkin, and 2 grad students, Milo and Kara. We were supposed to take seismic readings and report back. Simple. But from the first night, something felt wrong. When the wind died, we could hear something. A faint humming from the hole. Not wind, not machinery. It sounded like voices, whispering from deep inside the ice. The next morning, Dr. Larkin decided we'd go down. He said it was likely an ice cave formed by geothermal activity. But the walls, they glowed faintly blue, pulsing like veins. We rappelled down nearly 200 feet before we touched the floor. The ice under our boots wasn't solid. It vibrated, almost like a heartbeat. Milo switched on his scanner. "Doc, you're not going to believe this," he said, staring at the screen. "There's heat signatures under the ice." Larkin frowned. "That's impossible." Then Kara said, "No, it's not." She pointed her flashlight at the far wall. Something was frozen inside, a shape, human-sized, and it was moving. We stood there for minutes, not breathing. The figure behind the ice twitched again, a shoulder, then a face pressing forward. The ice cracked. Kara screamed. Dr. Larkin grabbed her arm. "Back up, now!" But the sound that followed wasn't ice breaking. It was a sigh. A long, hollow exhale that fogged the entire chamber. When it cleared, the figure was gone. But on the other side of the cave, footprints appeared, small, bare, leading deeper into the tunnel. Milo whispered, "We're not alone down here." We followed the prints. The tunnel curved downward, narrowing as we went. The walls glowed brighter, almost pulsing in rhythm with our footsteps. Then we saw it, a cavern wider than a cathedral, filled with a pool of perfectly still water. In the center, light shimmered below the surface, soft and golden, like a heartbeat in the deep. Dr. Larkin whispered, "Thermal vents? Bioluminescence?" But none of us believed that. The voices started again, hundreds of them rising from the water, whispering in a language that felt too close, like it was in our skulls. Milo covered his ears. "They're calling names," he cried, and one of those names was mine. I leaned closer to the pool, trying to see what was below. My reflection rippled, then changed. It wasn't me anymore. It was someone else. Pale, sunken eyes, mouth slightly open as if whispering. The reflection smiled, and then a hand shot up from beneath the surface, grabbing my wrist. It was freezing, skin slick like ice. Milo yanked me back just in time, but the water didn't ripple. It stayed still, perfectly smooth, as if nothing had happened. Dr. Larkin backed away. We're leaving. Now but the tunnel behind us had closed. Solid ice. Hours passed. Our radios went dead, batteries drained. The only sound was that low, humming chant from the water. Kara sat against the wall, shivering. They're inside my head, she whispered. Then, in perfect calm, she stood and began to walk toward the pool. Milo, stop her! I yelled. He ran, but as soon as he touched her, she froze mid-step. Her eyes rolled back, and she began whispering along with the voices. Then she collapsed into the pool. No splash, just gone. Like the water swallowed her whole. A second later, her voice joined the others below. Milo was losing it. He smashed his radio, his flashlight, screaming, "It's a dream! It's a dream!" But the light below pulsed faster now, like it was feeding off us. The ice walls shimmered with faint human silhouettes, as if people were trapped inside, pounding to get out. Dr. Larkin tried to record audio with his phone, but when we played it back, all we heard was a single word, repeated, "Remember." Then the silhouettes began to move. The ice cracked around them, and one by one, they opened their eyes. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted toward a side tunnel, the ground shaking beneath us. The light from the pool shot upward, a column of golden mist reaching the ceiling. The hum turned into a scream, 1,000 voices crying at once. Milo fell behind, tripping over his rope line. I turned to help, but a wall of ice surged upward between us, sealing him off. Through the frost, I saw him pounding with both fists, his mouth open in a silent scream. And then, he was gone. Dr. Larkin grabbed my arm. "We need to climb out now." The ice beneath us began to crack like thunder. We climbed. The rope burned my hands raw, the cold biting deep. The light kept following us, pulsing upward through the ice like a living thing. Halfway up, Dr. Larkin slipped. He dangled for a second, then the rope jerked violently. Something below had grabbed him. He looked at me, tears freezing on his cheeks. "Don't let them remember me," he said. And then, he was yanked down into the glow. I climbed until my fingers bled. When I reached the top, the sun was rising. The hole behind me sealed shut with a final, echoing crack. That was 6 years ago. They never found the others. The glacier is closed now, sealed off for safety. But last week, during an unseasonal melt, residents near Portage Lake reported seeing golden light beneath the ice again. And late at night, when everything's quiet, the ground hums. Sometimes, I put my ear to the frozen floor and listen. I can still hear Kara's voice down there, whispering my name. "Come back, Eli." We remember, and when the lights move under the ice, they pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. Alaska, a place of impossible beauty and unbearable silence. But in that silence, something listens, something remembers. From the shapeshifters in Glacier Bay to the whispers beneath Portage ice, every legend we've told tonight isn't just a story, it's a warning. The land out here doesn't forget the living. It keeps their voices, their faces, their fear. And if you ever find yourself wandering too far from the light, if the cold air grows too still and the night sky starts to hum, listen closely, because what you hear might not be the wind. It might be Alaska calling you home. pause, faint echo of a whisper. We remember. Thank you for joining me tonight, Darknight family. If you made it this far, you're one of the brave ones. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true disturbing tales from the darkest corners of our world. Until next time, sleep lightly and keep your lights on. Heartbeat fades, then silence. Thanks for watching. This was Darknight.